Welcome, everyone. First, I hope everyone is healthy and safe and doing what they need to do to stay that way. My name is Andrea Ray, and I have the pleasure to serve as the President CEO at the Chamber. And on behalf of our board and staff, welcome to our SMART Southside Mitigation and Recovery Task Force webinar today, where we're fortunate to present an overview of our state and federal COVID relief programs. This copyrighted webinar is presented by the Seattle Southside Chamber of Commerce and may not be reproduced or retransmitted in any form without the express written consent of the Chamber. Thank you to our sponsors, South King Media. Scott and Teresa Schaefer have been tireless advocates for our community. As a small business themselves, they are dedicated to helping other small businesses grow, as well as keeping our community connected and informed. Scott is broadcasting this webinar live on Facebook so that even more people are able to watch with us, ask questions. And we are recording, so those that aren't able to join live can still access the information later at their convenience. Thank you also to Chick-fil-A South Center for providing breakfast for all of our attendees today. Chick-fil-A is committed to safe service and giving back to the community. Thank you, Chick-fil-A. The Chamber will continue to produce webinars and virtual events on subjects impacting our community, and we hope you'll join us again in the future. You can register for all of our webinars and virtual events on our website, seattlesouthsidechamber.com. We know providing opportunities to share information and connect will make our community stronger and ready for recovery. We hope you can join us for more of these opportunities, and if you or your company is able to donate or sponsor our work, so that we can continue to serve our community in and through every challenge, it will be greatly appreciated. Every little bit helps. Even a donation of $1 brings us closer to recovery and keeps our independent nonprofit strong and able to serve our community. Thank you. A few Zoom housekeeping tips. For those of us who are joining us on Zoom, this is a Zoom webinar, not a meeting, which is why you are unable to unmute yourself or share your video. You are able to type questions to our panelists in the chat or by using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. If you prefer to raise your hand, we can promote you so that you can ask your question in person. We will have time available at the end of the presentation for any questions you might have. If you are joining us via Facebook, please go ahead and type your question into the comment section of the Facebook Live broadcast, and we will do our best to get those to our speakers. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our speakers today. We'll hear first from Tommy Gantz, who will speak towards the state of Washington relief programs. Tommy Gantz is AWB's Director of Governmental Affairs on Tax and Fiscal Policy and Manufacturing. She joined AWB in December of 2019. Gantz came to AWB from the private sector, most recently as a supply chain strategy analyst for Boeing Global Services in Renton, where she evaluated markets and trends while communicating strategy and evaluating performance metrics. Gantz is active in community leadership roles. She serves on the Aerospace Futures Alliance as the chair of the Business Development Committee. She is networking chair of the Royal Aeronautical Society's Seattle chapter and the outreach chair of the Women in Aviation's Seattle chapter. She is a member of King County Airport Authority Board and is a longtime docent at the Museum of Flight with nearly 1,000 hours of volunteer service. She is also a member of the Museum of Flight's Speakers Bureau. After Tommy, we'll hear from Chris Eiler, Executive Director of the Northwest Region for the U.S. Chamber on Federal Relief Programs. He works closely with state and local chambers and members of Congress in his region to further the legislative priorities of the Chamber. Earlier in his career, Eiler served as staff counsel on the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, where he advised Ranking Member Mike Enzi on post-secondary education and national service issues. In addition, he served as a legislative assistant handling healthcare, education, Social Security, and telecommunication issues for former Senators Frank Murkowski and Conrad Burns, as well as Representative Kevin Brady. Eiler received his BA in History and Political Science from Miami University and a law degree from the University of Oregon. We're so grateful that you both made time to be with us today to walk us through our state and federal programs. Tommy, please take it away.
Good morning, Andrea. Thank you so much. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about some of the legislation that passed recently within this session that is going to provide some distribution of federal funds at the state level. So we're going to talk today about House Bill 1368. This is a piece of legislation that was signed into law by Governor Inslee on February 19th and is effective immediately. So went into effect the same day. This bill appropriates $2.2 billion in federal funding from a combination of federal coronavirus relief, the Coronavirus Relief Act, and the Coronavirus Relief Funds under the Federal CARES Act, and Medicaid for K-12 public schools. Public health, healthcare assistance, assistance to individuals and families, housing assistance, and business assistance. The funding included $714 million for assistance to K through 12 schools, including $46 million for non-public school assistance, $618 million for public health, including $438 million for testing and contact tracing, $100 million for epidemiology and laboratory grants, and $68 million for vaccine. And then $365 million for a variety of housing related items, including rental assistance. And the big thing that we're going to be talking about mostly today is the $240 million in business assistance grants. The bill also contains $91 million for other income assistance programs, including $65 million for immigration services, $12 million for disaster cash assistance, $9 million for temporary assistance for needy families, and $5 million for food assistance, as well as $50 million for a variety of child care related items, and $26 million for food banks and other food related programs. So, Working Washington Round 4 offers grant relief funds to small for-profit businesses, especially those that were required to close due to public health and safety measures. The Working Washington Round 4 Business Grants Program application portal is scheduled to open March 29th. The priorities for funding in this says that businesses are required to close during the pandemic, and businesses with lost revenue as a result of closure would be a priority. Businesses with added expenses to maintain safe operations, and equitable distribution of grant funds across the state to businesses owned and operated by historically disadvantaged individuals. There was some conversation that in the initial rounds of grant funding, there was $50 million that Governor Inslee had committed to prior to the most recent bill that was signed into law. And there was some concerns that not everybody was approved for those that they believe should have been approved for equity purposes. And so they're going to give priority to those historically disadvantaged businesses in this program. And so some frequently asked questions that the department has received is, what is the Working Grants Round 4 program? Well, this is the Department of Commerce's Working Washington Small Business Grant Program, and it provides funding to help small businesses that have struggled due to COVID-19. Department of Commerce ran 3 rounds of grants in 2020, and Commerce is now going to open this 4th round. The state legislature approved this $240 million for the 4th round of grants through House Bill 1368. And some of the criteria outlined in this legislation include the things that we talked about on the prior slide, but businesses must receive their grant award by June 30th, 2021. So the money will go pretty fast. Commerce must take into account previous Working Washington awards distributed by agency or affiliated partners. So if you receive grant funding in the initial round, then it will reduce the amount that you're eligible for in this round. And so the grant awards will vary. The maximum grant will be around $25,000. The legislation actually says that they can provide up to $75,000 per business, but that would really diminish the amount of businesses that would qualify. Grants or would receive funding, not qualify. Grants must be equitably distributed statewide to historically underserved populations. And so another question that they've been getting is, who is this round intended for? These grants are aimed at for-profit businesses and industries that have hard costs associated with their operations and face the most significant challenges to paying for those hard costs due to the mandated closures. Hard costs include things like rent, utilities, payroll, And they are encouraging all eligible brick and mortar businesses that were required to close or significantly reduce operations due to the public health safety measure to apply. People are asking, how are the applications prioritized? Eligible applications will be reviewed based on the following priority criteria: industries that had to close as a result of safety and public health measures, the size of the business, which will be measured by your 2019 revenue, lost revenue between 2019 and 2020, as well as added expenses to maintain safe operations. To ensure equitable distribution, Commerce will also consider businesses operating in rural or low income community, or businesses that are owned by someone from a historically underserved population. Black, Indigenous, people of color, veteran, LGBTQ, or women owned businesses will get first priority. Another question that they're receiving is, how long will a person have to apply once the grant portal opens? The portal will be open for 12 days. It will be open from the morning of March 29th and close on April 9th at 5 p.m. Pacific time. The grant is not first come, first serve. All applicants who meet eligibility requirements and apply, all applicants are first come, first serve, but historically underserved communities will get first priority. So all applicants who meet eligibility requirements and apply between the 29th and April 9th at 5 p.m. will be considered, but it is not first come, first serve. And the 40 million, or where does the funding come from? The 240 million comes from federal relief funds that were appropriated in the bill. And then another question that Commerce says they're getting is, what is Commerce doing to address equitable distribution? The statewide Business Resiliency Network helps to provide extensive outreach to underserved and historically disadvantaged communities who may not otherwise know about the grants. So Commerce is translating the materials into 18 different languages and providing technical support by phone in 8 languages in addition to English. To ensure equitable distribution, Commerce will also consider businesses operating, as we discussed, in rural, low income, or from a historically underserved, disadvantaged population. If you wanted to have some more information, I wanted to provide this to everyone. They're asking people to contact their technical support assistants for navigating the application portal if there's any concerns. Individuals needing assistance in these other language, the in-language support center will also be open from March 29th through April 9th. And the number for that center offers support in 8 other languages and will be posted very soon. And culturally and linguistically appropriate assistance is now available through Commerce's Business Resiliency Network. And there is an online directory on the Commerce website. I also put a link up there that you can take down if you want to be updated and receive email updates on these grants. You can sign up for those as well. And the state's Working Washington Round 4 Small Business COVID-19 Relief Grant Program will provide grants to eligible businesses up to $25,000, as I mentioned. And the program's focus for helping small for-profit businesses. And I want to stress that this program is for-profit businesses, and I will get to the nonprofit piece in a moment. It's for businesses impacted by COVID-19 and health and safety related measures. We talked a little bit about eligibility, and the requirements for eligibility will be active for-profit businesses or individual DBA locations in Washington State. Businesses can only apply for one location per business as identified by a UBI number. That you have to have been in business before January 1st, 2020 and filed a 2019 tax return. And you must generate at least 51% of your revenue in Washington State. You must operate from a physical brick and mortar location in Washington State, separate from an owner's home. And you must have reported gross annual revenue between $25,000 and $5 million in 2019. You must also have experienced a decrease in revenue or incurred additional costs between 2019 and 2020 due to COVID-19 public health and safety measures. Who is ineligible for round 4? Nonprofit businesses or organizations, childcare providers, not including recreation or entertainment, school, so any schools or higher education institutions, libraries, hospitals, healthcare providers, property management or real estate, including owners and operators of short-term rental properties, Professional services like accounting, insurance, legal, financial services firms, and architects are all not eligible. No agriculture or aquaculture producers, no licensed marijuana cannabis operators, drivers of shared ride companies like Lyft or Uber. You can't be a host of a vacation short-term rental home like an Airbnb or a VBRO. No government entities or elected officials are eligible for this funding. No passive businesses or investment companies. Uh, Investors who file like a Schedule E on their personal tax returns. Financial businesses primarily engaged in businesses of lending, such as banks or finance companies, are not eligible. I mean, the list is pretty long and goes on. I'll be happy to share that out with people. And this slide just is going to show you the documentation that you will need for the round four: a copy of your 2019 tax return, your 2020 tax return if you filed it. If the 2020 documents are not available, the business owners must attest and estimate the amount of their annual gross revenues. Washington State UBI number. If you're a tribal owned business, you can provide your alternative business validation. A federal employer EIN number, your valid government issued ID, and a completed W-9 form, and they will accept digital copies. So this number at the top that I have, I've since received a correction on that. There's actually $43 million in funds for not-for-profits. Um, the funds are being looked at in a variety of different ways, specifically for chambers, where there's about $2.25 million that's being negotiated or set aside specifically for chambers. I believe a contract may have been signed yesterday. The funds would need to also be distributed from June 30th, but I want to be clear that this is not part of House Bill 1368, and that this is not federal funding. This is these are different funds that were set aside specifically for nonprofits. And the March 1st, 2020 is the date that the funds you would be eligible to if you had business impacts starting as far back as March 1st, 2020. But all of this is still being negotiated, or a contract may have been signed yesterday. I haven't been updated. But one of the main distinctions of this funding is that it's not federal funds, it's state funding from the State Disaster Response Account from the governor's office, and not recent funding allocated in House Bill 1368. If these grant funds are relief funds to reflect economic injury due to COVID-19 that has already occurred, then there's no need to monitor expensive funds that the end recipient makes after they receive award. However, they would need to affirm that they were prior expenses incurred and that has caused them to need funds to apply. In this scenario, it's not advisable to send the funds out in grants for expenses that are planned for the future. So for businesses that apply for a grant to spend funds later the year for other expenses or for upgrades. What some of the allowable uses of the funds are: to purchase um, to make payments, lease, or maintain equipment. Those are not things that should be considered. Let me back up. So using these funds is not advised to purchase equipment. If the equipment has already been purchased and their cost to make payments, lease, or maintain equipment should not be considered. Otherwise, buying new equipment will be very complicated due to state law and creating plans for state ownership of it depending on when it depreciates. So they're going to put out some guidance in the next couple of days on the equipment purchase piece. But each chamber would need their own 1099 document process, and they would have to maintain their own documentation for use of these funds. And lastly, chambers cannot use these funds if they used a PPP loan for the same expenses that they are claiming, i.e. they can't use PPP loans on rent from January through March and then try to claim the same payments with state funds. And Drew Garson did send me an update yesterday on some of the negotiations. I'm happy to go back out and share that. But a lot of this is all still being negotiated. So our firm, AWB, has been asked by Commerce to develop a proposal to serve as an agent to distribute funding to chambers. And these funds would be in the form of a relief grant for the undue burden that chambers have experienced during the COVID-19 pandemic. And we would additionally, Commerce has said that they would like to see chambers demonstrate decreased revenue and an increase in activity, i.e. taking on additional services and activities to address the needs of the business community. So that concludes my presentation on the business grant side, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Tommy. I really appreciate you walking us through that. We definitely get a lot of questions at our chamber about the Working Washington grants, and I know we'll have lots of time for questions at the end. So really appreciate you walking us through that. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea.
It is now my pleasure to introduce Chris Eiler, who will walk us through the federal programs and the American Recovery Act. Chris, I'm passing it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Andrea. If you could advance to, there you go. As Andrea said, my name is Chris Eiler. I am the U.S. Chamber's Executive Director for the Northwest region. It's a pleasure to be back with all of you. I've joined on these webinars in the past to walk you through the various stages of federal relief that the Congress has passed. Today, I'm going to largely focus on the American Rescue Plan as well as the bill that was passed this past December. So over the past year, Congress has passed a number of pieces of legislation to respond to the ongoing pandemic. The four most significant are the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. This was also referred to as the Phase 2 bill. It largely dealt with paid sick and paid family and medical leave that the federal government was requiring small businesses to provide related to the pandemic, and that the federal government would reimburse. The next piece of legislation, the largest piece of legislation to date, is the CARES Act that was passed just over a year ago in March 2020. Among other things, this created the Paycheck Protection Program. It expanded the SBA's Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. It created the Employee Retention Tax Credit, and it provided significant funding to state governments. A lot of that funding is what Tommy just spoke about, and how the state of Washington is going to be distributing much of that funding. But as I said, the two most recent bills and the bills I'm going to talk about today, first was the $900 billion relief package that was included in the fiscal 2021 Consolidated Appropriations Act that was passed in December, and then most recently, the American Rescue Plan. I'm going to largely focus on the business programs, but I do want to just talk generally about the overall contents of the American Rescue Plan. At $1.9 trillion, it is more than twice as large as the $900 billion package passed in December, but still slightly less than the $2.2 trillion CARES Act passed a year ago in March. The American Rescue Plan largely addresses the pandemic in four distinct ways. First, it addresses the need to turbocharge vaccine distribution. In addition to all of the aid it provides to businesses, this is perhaps the most important thing to the business community, because this, obviously, the sooner we get vaccines into people's arms, and the more broadly we do that, the sooner we are able to reopen our economy. Next, it provides significant resources in the form of payments to individuals. First, it extends the federal enhanced unemployment insurance until September 6th, and it includes an additional $300 supplement on top of what the state provides. Additionally, it provides for another round of stimulus checks in the amount of $1,400 per person. I should note that these checks do phase out completely for individuals who make more than $80,000 per year, and for households that make $160,000 per year. It also significantly increases the child tax credit to $3,000 per child. And for children under the age of 6, it increases that child tax credit to $3,600 per child. And it allows families to claim children as old as 17 in order to claim the child tax credit. Next, it provides significant resources to state and local governments in the amount of $350 billion. For the state of Washington, it's estimated that Washington State is going to receive roughly $7.1 billion through the American Rescue Plan. Just over $4 billion of that is earmarked for the state government, and the remaining amount is earmarked for county and city governments. And I've put up here on this slide what is estimated that King County in general will get, the city of Seattle, and then all of the communities served by the Seattle Southside Chamber. There are very few restrictions being placed on this funding. In short, they've basically said that this funding cannot go to pension funds, and it cannot be used to as a pay for a tax cut. Otherwise, the money is Congress has directed that this money should go for pandemic-related revenue losses and expenses. Otherwise, there are very few restrictions, as I said. And our advice to our state and local chamber partners is that you need to begin speaking with your legislators, your city councils, your county executives as soon as possible in order to encourage them to spend this money in a way that helps the business community. I know, as Tommy was discussing earlier, we know that our partners at AWB are already in those discussions with the state legislature and the governor, and I'm pretty certain that Andrea is already having those discussions with all of the jurisdictions that your chamber serves. But as I said, what I'm really going to focus on today are the programs that are set up to assist small businesses. And the four main programs that are impacted by this bill, as well as all of the other pieces of legislation that have been passed over the past year, are the Employee Retention Tax Credit, the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant Program, a brand new Restaurant Revitalization Fund, and of course, the Paycheck Protection Program. So I'm going to start first with the Employee Retention Tax Credit. This is a refundable tax credit that was created a year ago by the CARES Act. Under the original law, businesses that had experienced at least a 50% drop in gross revenues could claim a 50% or could claim a refundable tax credit of 50% on wages up to $10,000 per employee per year. So in other words, a business can claim a refundable tax credit up to $5,000 per employee last year if they had significant revenue loss and they continued to pay their employees. Under the bill that was passed in December, Congress made a number of significant modifications to the Employee Retention Tax Credit to make this more beneficial to businesses. First, under the original law, you could not claim the Employee Retention Tax Credit if you also received a Paycheck Protection Program loan. They eliminated that restriction in the December bill, and they made it retroactive. So if you received a Paycheck Protection Program last year, and you can also continued paying your employees after you exhausted that Paycheck Protection Program loan, you should be talking to your accountant about how you can go back and claim the Employee Retention Tax Credit on those wages that you paid after your Paycheck Protection Program loan expired. The one restriction here, and it's a restriction that you're going to hear across all of these programs, is that you cannot claim you cannot claim the Employee Retention Tax Credit on the same wages that you used the Paycheck Protection Program loan to pay. So if you use your Paycheck Protection Program loan to pay wages last June and July, you cannot claim the Employee Retention Tax Credit on those wages. But if you had a Paycheck Protection Program loan in those months and then exhausted the loan and continued to pay your employees in August, September, October, et cetera, you can claim the Employee Retention Tax Credit on those wages that you paid in the subsequent months. The next significant change they made is they made it a more generous tax credit for 2021. They increased the credit from 50% on wages up to $10,000 to 70% on wages up to $10,000. So in other words, you can get up to $7,000 per employee. Furthermore, they made it a quarterly tax credit instead of an annual tax credit. So for 2021, for the first 2 quarters of 2021, you can get up to $7,000 per employee per quarter for Q1 and Q2 of 2021. They further lowered the threshold to make this tax credit more available to businesses. Under the new law, businesses that have experienced at least a 20% drop in gross receipts are now eligible for the Employee Retention Tax Credit, and they raised the employee cap to 500 or fewer employees. So a business with 500 or fewer employees that has experienced at least a 20% drop in gross revenues compared to the same quarter in 2019 can now claim up to $7,000 per employee tax credit per quarter for Q1 and Q2 under the Employee Retention Tax Credit based on the changes made in December. The one significant change that was made in the American Rescue Plan is they expanded this. They retained all of these changes that were made in December, and they expanded it to the end of the year. So now a business can claim a $7,000, up to a $7,000 per employee tax credit per quarter throughout 2021, so long as the business has 500 or fewer employees and they experienced a 20% loss in gross receipts in a quarter compared to that same quarter in 2019. This is potentially a $28,000 per employee tax credit. One thing to keep in mind with the tax credit is this is not something that you apply for through SBA. It's not something you apply through IRS or Treasury. It is something that you need to work with your accountant and whomever prepares your taxes on how to claim it on your tax filing. The next significant program is the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant Program. This is a $15 billion grant program that was created in December in the end of year appropriations package to help live venue operators. These are businesses that include movie theaters, playhouses, museums, zoos, aquariums, as well as talent representatives and theatrical producers. These are largely businesses that have been shut down completely since the onset of the pandemic. In order to be eligible, one of these venues must have experienced at least a 25% drop in gross revenue. Once the grants are awarded, you can be awarded 45% of 2019 gross revenue up to $10 million. The big significant change that was made in the American Rescue Plan is that they made it so that one of these businesses that did receive a Paycheck Protection Program loan can also receive a Shuttered Venue Operators Grant. However, just like with the Employee Retention Tax Credit, you cannot use the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant to pay for the same expenses you use your Paycheck Protection Program loan to pay. The SBA just last week announced that they will begin accepting applications for Shuttered Venue Operator grants beginning on April 8th. However, I do want to note, and I'm going to put this in the chat, they are going to host a webinar on March 30th to walk potential applicants through the application process and answer a lot of questions about the specific types of venues that will be made eligible for the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant program. I put the link to the registration page for that webinar in the chat. Please, if this is something that is of interest to you, please register for that webinar so that you can get fully up to speed and be ready to apply for the grant when the portal opens on April 8th. The next program is very similar to the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant Program, but it is a brand new program. It was created by the American Rescue Plan. It is the so-called Restaurant Revitalization Fund. It is a $25 billion grant program that is directed at, as the name implies, restaurants, bars, food stands, food trucks, food carts, caterers, saloons, inns, taverns, lounges, brew pubs, tasting rooms, tap rooms, pretty much any business whose primary purpose is to serve food and beverage to the public. They've laid out, as I just listed, all of those types of establishments were listed specifically in the legislative language in an effort to capture pretty much any type of establishment, again, whose primary purpose is to serve food and beverage to the public. The grant amount is the amount of your pandemic-related revenue loss up to $10 million per entity or $5 million per location. So you calculate the amount of the grant by subtracting your 2019 revenue from your 2020 revenue from your 2019 revenue. The difference is the amount of your grant up to $10 million per entity or $5 million per location. The grant, you can use the grant for payroll purposes, mortgage and rent, utilities, supplies, food and beverage expenses, paid sick leave, or operational expenses. At this point in time, the application process is not open. This is a brand new program. It was just passed by Congress just over 2 weeks ago, so there's still a lot of work for the SBA and the Department of Treasury to do. But but restaurants can start taking some preliminary steps. We do know that in order to apply for one of these grants, once that portal is open, restaurants will need a DUNS number, and then they will also need to be registered with sam.gov. This is the federal government's grant registration page. So if you are a restaurant, or any other type of establishment whose primary purpose is to serve food and beverage to the public, and you intend to apply for one of these grants when the opportunity comes, you can start now by getting a DUNS number and registering with sam.gov. The last program I want to speak about is obviously the Paycheck Protection Program. I think at this point we all are well familiar with what the Paycheck Protection Program is. It is a loan that converts to a grant so long as the loan recipient uses the funds for certain specified expenses, most notably payroll. The bill that passed in December made a number of significant changes to the Paycheck Protection Program, including extending the authority to issue new loans till the end of March of this year. It created a brand new second draw program for particularly hard hit businesses. So businesses that have experienced at least a 25% drop in gross revenues, and who have exhausted their first Paycheck Protection Program loan could apply for a second Paycheck Protection Program loan. It provided for a dramatically simplified forgiveness process for loans of $150,000 or less. In essence, they are going to utilize a one-page loan forgiveness application where the business stipulates that they or attests that they use the funds for the specified purposes of payroll, utilities, mortgage interest, and mortgage interest. And then the loan would be essentially presumed forgiven, but you still do have to fill out that one-page form. They expanded the list of eligible expenses beyond just payroll, mortgage interest, and utilities to include a number of other things, including expenses that businesses incurred to implement social distancing and employee protection, as well as some other additional costs. But they did, just to be clear, you still have to spend at least 60% of your Paycheck Protection Program loan proceeds on payroll in order to be eligible for forgiveness. They also made sure it was abundantly clear to the IRS that under no circumstances are loan proceeds that are forgiven to be taxed. They further clarified that the IRS is to allow businesses to deduct expenses that they use their Paycheck Protection Program loans to pay for. They further made clear that economic injury disaster loan advance or emergency grant that you could apply for up to $10,000 and receive would not reduce the amount of your loan forgiveness under the Paycheck Protection Program loan. And importantly to many of us, they expanded the list of nonprofits eligible for PPP loans to include 501c6 nonprofits, which are local chambers of commerce. The American Rescue Plan didn't really make many additional changes beyond what was done in December. The two things they did do is they further expanded that list of nonprofits that can obtain a PPP loan. Under the CARES Act and then the changes made in December, the nonprofits that were eligible for a PPP loan included 501c3 charitable nonprofits, 501c6 chambers of commerce, and 501c19 veterans organizations. The American Rescue Plan expands this list to include other 501c nonprofits. They've also provided some additional funding to shore up the Paycheck Protection Program, though I will say that there is still plenty of money available for new Paycheck Protection Program loans. The one thing that they did not do that we are still working on is they did not extend that deadline beyond March 31st to get a new Paycheck Protection Program loan. So just to be clear, under current law, the authority to issue new Paycheck Protection Program loans expires on March 31st. However, last week, the U.S. House of Representatives passed a bill on a vote of 415 to 3 to extend that deadline to the end of May. We are right now just waiting for the Senate to take that legislation up and pass it. We are fairly confident that the Senate will do that, but for the moment, there is still a little bit of legislative wrangling going on. But we remain confident that we will be able to get that deadline extended until the end of March, or I'm sorry, the end of May. But in this political environment, nothing is guaranteed. So if you are considering getting a Paycheck Protection Program loan, or if you are in need of a second draw Paycheck Protection Program loan, I would encourage you to talk to your lender as soon as possible, just to make sure that you don't miss any deadlines and to make sure that your loan application is in the pipeline. I know this is an awful lot and it can be pretty confusing. So we have developed a number of guide documents that are on our website that I've shared with Andrea and her colleagues at the chambers across the state that walk you through each of these various small business programs or various programs designed to assist small businesses. You can find them on our website at uschamber.com/coronavirus. But just as far as a quick summary, just the things I want you to take away here with respect to the employee retention tax credit, start talking to whomever prepares your taxes and whomever handles your payroll about how you can begin taking advantage of that tax credit. Again, that for 2021, it has the potential to be up to $28,000 per employee. Again, it's up to $7,000 per employee per quarter. So again, $28,000 per year. If you are experiencing at least a 20% drop in gross revenues as compared to the same quarter in 2019. On this, the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant Program, get registered for that March 30th webinar so that you can get all the most up-to-date information on how the SBA is going to process those applications and the specifics of what types of businesses they are going to consider a shuttered venue for the purposes of that grant. Again, the application portal will open on April 8th, but and that webinar will be held on March 30th. On the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, that program has not opened. We don't know when it will open yet, but businesses can take a number of preliminary steps, get that DUNS number, and get registered with sam.gov. We, of course, will be in communication with the SBA and providing information to Andrea and her colleagues about when that application process will open. But if you can't wait, just keep monitoring the SBA website as they post more information on that. And then lastly, the Paycheck Protection Program. Again, we are working to get that deadline extended beyond March 31st, but as I said, there's no guarantees. So if you are looking to apply for a Paycheck Protection Program loan, please start speaking with your lender as soon as possible so that you can get that application in and get it in the pipeline. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Chris. And there are some questions in the chat here. So I am going to go ahead and answer the first one. Because the first question is whether or not our chamber offers technical assistance, appointments, or support for small businesses that need assistance applying for these different recovery programs. And the short answer is yes, we do provide that assistance. It is free, it is confidential. And we also partner very closely with our colleagues at the SBDC at Highline College. I think Rich Shockley is actually on this call. And so we refer people back and forth all the time. What's great also about Rich and his colleagues at the SBDC is that they have many different language services that are available. But last year alone, we held over 1,600 technical assistance appointments for businesses that were looking for cash assistance, and we secured millions of dollars in funding. So I'm going to go ahead and put that information into the chat for how people can make appointments with us. And Rich, if you're still here with us, please feel free to put your contact information into the chat as well. And we also have a link there to that the webinar on March 30th, Chris, that you mentioned about the Shuttered Venue operation grants too. So support and help is absolutely available. We realize that as a small business owner, you are very busy operating your business, and especially now with increased, capacity and demands because of COVID, it takes some time to navigate, these websites and these applications and these procedures. So absolutely reach out to us for help and support, and we will do our best to get you the information and the support that you need. So that is the first question. I'm going to go ahead and scroll up here and see what other questions are coming in. Again, just a reminder that if you are watching on the Facebook Live broadcast, you can go ahead and type that question into the comment section. And if you are joining us on the Zoom webinar, you can use the Q&A portion, or you can just go ahead and type that into the chat. So thank you so much for being here. Question coming into the Q&A from one of our Zoom attendees. Can you still qualify for the employee retention tax credit if you get this shuttered venue operators grant? So I don't know, maybe Chris, you want to take that one?
Yeah. Yes, you should be able to qualify for both, but just keep in mind you cannot. It's like everything else. You cannot claim employee retention tax credit on the same wages that you might be using the shuttered venue operator grant to pay for. I will also say that one restriction that has been put in is that you cannot obtain both a shuttered venue operator grant and a restaurant revitalization fund grant. That is one restriction that they have included. So you can't include both, but you can receive both a Paycheck Protection Program loan and a shuttered venue operators grant. But again, you can't double dip. You can't claim the same. You can't use the venue grant for the same expense you use the Paycheck Protection Program loan for. But again, I can't emphasize enough, tune in for that webinar on March 30th when SBA starts to walk you through all of these provisions. There are a lot of things that Congress included in the legislative text, but the SBA, is obviously going to put a lot of their own rules on these funds as they distribute them. One of the things I didn't address that I forgot to address is that when they do start issuing the grants, they're going to prioritize the hardest hit businesses. And they've, on their website, you'll see that they have defined those as businesses that have experienced at least a 90% drop in gross revenues. Those businesses will get the priority for the first 2 weeks of the grant. Then after 2 weeks, that drops down to businesses that have experienced at least a 70% drop in gross revenues. And 2 weeks after that is when they get to that businesses that have experienced at least a 25% drop in gross revenue. The statute did specify that they are supposed to emphasize the hardest hit, and that's how they've determined that they're going to do that.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Chris. I think this question might be more directed to Tommy, but definitely, Chris, help me out here. But this comes from a business who did receive 2 grants in 2020. One was a city grant that came from the Federal CARES Act funding, right? So the federal government gave to the cities and then the cities gave to businesses. And then the other came directly from the Department of Commerce, presumably through, one of the 3, rounds of the Working Washington grant. What are the chances that they can apply and be successful again, right? I mean, we are still, we just on Monday went to, 50% capacity, right? The economic impacts are tough. And the need is still very much there. So could you speak just a little bit about, I know, Chris, you said, priority will be given to those businesses, that have received, the most impact. Is that your understanding as well, Tommy, when we're reviewing these applications again? That's what the Department of Commerce will be looking at?
If we're speaking specifically to the $240 million that was received in the most recent round of funding for business grants through Department of Commerce, then they will take into consideration previous grant funds received from Department of Commerce. I don't know if city grants are included in that. If they're receiving other federal dollars, that would be a question for the Department of Commerce. But the chance is still good that they are eligible for additional funds, because the first round of funding, I believe, was, I want to say 10 to 15,000, and the newest round will allow for up to 25,000. So there is still a chance that they will be eligible for those. It depends on how quickly the money runs out. and what other businesses are applying and what their need is.
Perfect, great. I think that helps clarify for sure. One other, point of clarification, I think, Chris and Tommy, there's a running theme, right, for all of these relief programs, which is essentially trying to prevent, people from kind of double dipping, right? If you're already claiming here, you can't claim here, here, and here, you claim it once, right? So similar to like doing your taxes, right? You can claim something once, you can't claim it in multiple places. Just point of clarification, if their business received the PPP loan in 2020, is it ineligible for one of the new Department of Commerce grants?
No, not that I'm aware of. It's strictly, as I understand it, predicated on previous grant funds and is the completely separate from the PPP loans. But there may be some stipulations around how they use that money if they have had PPP loans. And that's different from the nonprofit grants that I discussed at the end, that those are still being negotiated. That has some different limitations because it's not the same bucket of money.
Perfect. Great. Thank you so much. This next question is related to, vaccines. So I know, the programs, that are coming are really, prioritizing funding for, grant for vaccine distribution. I know even King County came out yesterday with their budget announcements, increased funding, for increased vaccine distribution. There really is no way to know, where the different vaccines are being distributed. So this is a specific question about, if I want the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, will part of the, investments in vaccine distribution include some type of portal that will allow for, consumer choice? I don't know if any of you have any of that information. I don't think so. I think it's, each vaccine site is, using the distributed vaccine that they have available, and there really isn't consumer choice at this point. But I'm curious if you guys have heard anything different.
No, I mean, we haven't. The most I can really say there is that is whatever all the health experts are saying, which is the best vaccine to get is the first one that you can get when you're made eligible. And for our part, the U.S. Chamber is coordinating with the White House, the National Association of Manufacturers, and the Business Roundtable on what we are calling Rally to Recovery. I've distributed that information to Andrea, but I'll send it again afterwards so that you can include it in the follow-up materials. But basically what that is a series of steps that employers can take to encourage their employees to get vaccinated, things that they can do to help them get vaccinated, including giving them time off to get to a vaccination site. And then additionally, all the things that they can do until their employees get vaccinated, like promote social distancing, mask wearing, et cetera, et cetera. But as far as where you can go and get a specific vaccine, we don't have information on that.
There is a website that the Department of Health has, and I'm not sure if it's the doh.wa.gov. There is a list of vaccine locations that you can look for by your zip code, and there are different options. Are you looking for your first dose? Are you looking for your second dose? I have seen some instances where they say, okay, we have the Pfizer vaccine, but someone will get there and it's Moderna, but they're relatively similar in their efficacy at this point. We do have Amy Anderson from our team who is leading all that work between AWB and Department of Health here on the Washington State side. And she regularly has some webinars around that information. So you can also check our site for the most recent webinar on the vaccine distribution piece.
Perfect. Great. Thank you so much. The last question that we have here is that will this information be available later? So we know small businesses are very busy. It's very important to us that we record the information and then have it available later. So yes, this information will be available, on our website, on our YouTube channel. So that you can access it, you can pause, you can rewind, you can, share it with your friends, and, make sure that you, get that information that you need. So again, Thank you so much for being here. I don't know, Chris or Tommy, if you kind of, have any final thoughts before we close out.
No, like I said during my presentation on those grant programs, the best thing you can do is keep an eye on the SBA's website. If you're looking to get a PPP loan, talk to a lender as soon as possible. On the employee retention tax credit, work with your accountant and your tax preparer on claiming that tax credit. And then also keep an eye on our website. We are trying to keep up to date with everything that we are getting from Treasury and SBA on all these programs, and creating guide documents to help walk you through those.
And our end, Department of Commerce is working with Drew Garson from our end to work some more on the chamber grants. And there is supposed to be a list coming out soon of allowable expenses, and I'll try to get that to you as soon as it's available.
Perfect. Great. Well, again, thank you so much, Chris. Thank you, Tommy. We, really appreciate and value our relationship and our partnership with both the U.S. Chamber and the Association of Washington Business. So, we were founded on the belief that together we are stronger. And, we, again, really appreciate your help and your partnership. Thank you also to Scott and South King Media. Thank you to Chick-fil-A. And again, thank you, of course, all, for being here this morning. We really appreciate it. Again, as I mentioned, this webinar will be posted to our website so that you can view and share it later. That's seattlesouthsidechamber.com/smart. You can also donate directly to our work there. Again, even a small donation helps us continue to serve our community. And we are grateful. You do not have to be a chamber member to access our support services. So donations and investments, are huge to help us continue our work and to help support everyone within our community. You can also find more information about our upcoming virtual events. So again, hope everybody has a wonderful rest of the day. Stay healthy, stay safe, and until next time, we'll see you soon. Thank you.